City University Television presents the American Theater Wing Seminars. Working in the theater. This seminar, Playscript Director.
I'm Isabel Stevenson, president of the American Theater Wing, and I want to welcome you to our seminars on working in the theater, which are coming to you from the City University Graduate Center of New York, located in Times Square, right in the heart of the theater district. This is where the Broadway theater, the off-Broadway, and the off-off-Broadway all come together. The Wing is perhaps best known for its Tony Awards, an award that is most coveted because it is given for excellence in the theater, not for the best or the longest run. But the Wing is much more than that. And for example, these seminars, which are coming to you, are an outgrowth of the Wing School, a school where people like Howard Prince and Rodgers and Hammerstein and Robert Anderson and legions of playwrights and directors and performers taught and learned from each other and shared their knowledge and their craft. The Wing is perhaps the longest running, ongoing, nonprofit organization devoted to service to the community through the theater. Our legendary stage door canteens, our hospital program, which continues today. And today we bring Broadway, off-Broadway, live professional entertainment into hospitals and nursing homes so that those who can't go to the theater come to see theater in their auditoriums. And then perhaps our most important program, or one of our most important programs, is our Saturday Theater for Children program. And this is a program that goes into the public schools at the elementary school age on Saturday mornings. It's professional, it's Broadway and off-Broadway again, and it's the best of the theater that we can bring in. And the children line up and buy a ticket to go to the theater. This is very important. They consider this part of learning how to go to the theater. The teachers contribute their time during the week and they talk theater. They use the language of theater. And the children make that commitment for Saturday morning to buy a ticket. And no child is ever turned away if it doesn't have the money. But they know that they can buy a ticket and go to the theater. This is creating a habit of theater going. These children, it has already been proven, and it will again be proven by their attending theater as a need, live theater as part of their lives. Not because it's a special occasion, not because they have only going to the theater, only going to go to one big hit that has been reviewed successfully, but because they know what good theater is, and they will go to it. And so I will now like to tell you a little bit about the seminars. Today's seminar is on the playwright director, and it tends to explore the importance between the two. And to help in that exploration are our moderators. Jean Dalrymple, member of the board of directors of the American Theater Wing, author, director herself, and George White, president of the Eugene O'Neill Center, also a director. And I will turn the seminars over to our two very capable co-moderators, and they will in turn introduce this really wonderful array of talent that makes up our panel today. Thank you very, very much for being here.
really have a very, very distinguished panel of playwrights and directors today, and I'm going to introduce some of them to you right away, beginning with the young lady on my far left who specializes in new scripts. And she wrote a wonderful article about the value of working on new scripts. Marvelous. Thank you very much for including it in the material you sent me. She's worked on new scripts in development stages at the New Dramatists, at the O'Neill Playwrights Conference, the Minneapolis Playwrights Center, and the Repertory Theater of St. Louis. And right now she has a play that she directed playing just slightly off Broadway at the Lambs Theater, Miss Susan Gregg. Next to her is a playwright who has worked with her on developing new scripts and whose first play on Broadway was a big hit and was nominated for a Tony Award and also nominated for an Oppenheimer Award. I don't know if you knew that.
No, I didn't. Congratulations. Thank you.
I was the one who nominated it.
Thank
you. The first play, of course, as you probably all know, was Agnes of God, which is being made into a movie. And he has a new play scheduled for New York very soon called Sleight of Hand. John Pielmeier. The next playwright is the author of many short stories and a novella also. And he's had his plays done off-Broadway and also down in the Annenberg Center in Philadelphia. A very nice place to start new playwrights, by the way. And he wrote the Tony-nominated play First Breeze of Summer, produced by the Negro Ensemble Company, and his name is Leslie Lee. Well, I hardly know what to say about this gentleman. I'm in sort of this very young man. I'm sort of in awe of what he has done. I've loved everything he has that I've seen of his. He was nominated several years ago for a Tony Award with the Pirates of Penzance. And then he won the, I don't mean nominated, I mean he won it. And he also won the Tony this year for The Mystery of Edwin Drood. His name is Wilford Leach.
On my far stage right, if I may, next to Isabel Stevenson, is Arvin Brown, who is the artistic director of the Wharf Theatre for the past 18 years. And he has staged productions throughout the United States and London and has directed both for film and TV. He's last represented on Broadway with Joe Egg, which won a Tony Award for the best reproduction of that year. And on his left, Mr. Howard Fast, who I'm sure you all know is one of the most widely read writers of the 20th century, with over 60 novels to his credit. That's incredible. The upcoming Citizen Tom Paine is his first Broadway production, although he's written plays for off-Broadway and regional theater and television. So he is brand new to Broadway, and welcome, sir, to the panel. On his left is James Simpson, who is a graduate of a place called the Yale School of Drama, where he's also taught theater. He's co-founder and artistic director of the Kozo Theater in New York, directed off-Broadway and regional theater, and Citizen Tom Paine marks his Broadway debut. Simpson. On my immediate right is a gentleman who began with a play called, among his actually best-known plays, The Indian Wants the Bronx, which introduced us all to Mr. Al Pacino, and Line, which starred unknowns at that point, like Richard Dreyfuss and Bernard Hughes. and he's currently represented at Theater 890 in Today I Am a Fountain Pen, Mr. Israel Horovitz. I thought that I would like to perhaps start the proceedings today with a little bit of a question to all of the panel, beginning perhaps with a statement. Back in the, I guess, the early 60s, when Peter Brook sort of burst on the scene with such things as Marat Sade and a new telling of Midsummer Night's Dream, it seemed to start a revolution in a thing that became known later on in the later 60s as the cult, if you will, of the director, where we began to have such things as directors saying to playwrights, you go over and sit over there for a while and I'll take care of your play and just don't bother me and we'll get it done, and all kinds of things happened. And I think some of the playwrights on the panel have had that experience. And then there's the other perhaps school of directing, if I may say, which really relates to taking and becoming a midwife to the playwright's craft. I think that perhaps we are seeing almost an amalgamation of some of that, and I wondered if someone might like to begin by addressing these kinds of schools and how experiences or war stories or horror stories that you may have had with these. Perhaps Susan, would you like to address that in a moment?
I hold with the school of it's his play, and my job is to get inside the logic of that play, or of the playwright's mind, if you will. I think as a director, I don't know how to do what I call concept directing, which is what George was talking about before. I think that happens by and large on the classics when a theater is looking for a new way, say, to look at Midsummer Night's Dream, which is a good example with Peter Brook, which I think that concept did fit, as did his Carmen. I couldn't do that with a new script. I mean, nobody even knows what it is yet. I think I have an obligation as a director who works almost exclusively on new scripts to do what this guy wrote and not put a philosophical statement on top of it that perhaps doesn't belong there. And I have a hard time thinking of it any other way. So I can't address the first part of the question.
I wonder if any of our playwrights have had that experience of having people sort of relegate them to the back row. Leslie, you?
Yeah, I've had that experience. I won't mention any names, though, but, but I've had that experience. But I think I was relatively new, as a writer, and I was so excited about having a play done that I thought that my job was to sit there and to not say anything and to be a good boy, etc. Then I realized that this was a collaboration. In fact, I have a play opening at the Negro Ensemble Company for previews today, in fact. And this is the first time I've ever let a director edit my play without my having anything to do with it. That's Douglas Turner Ward. He and I have worked together before, and I think as I matured, there's a certain amount of trust that developed between the two of us. And so therefore, it's the very first time. I don't know whether, with him, yes, I think I've established that rapport and relationship where that can happen, where every word he edited and I did nothing. Normally, it's my script and I want to edit it, but this is the first time. I hope that it begins a process of, with other directors, but, this is the first time it's ever happened.
Well, now, Will, I know you, I don't know what, you had perhaps the good fortune of not having to deal with W.S. Gilbert, who I hear is a fairly cranky fellow.
His followers are legion,
okay.
and have a great deal to say about everything you do, in the case of Gilbert. But like speaking of the Peter Brook and so forth, I believe that most of the directors that I'm acquainted with really set out to do the work that's there. Although it may seem to other people a concept, who knows what Shakespeare had in mind for Midsummer Night's Dream, so there's no way to do it accurately. In the case of Gilbert, I had always hated Gilbert and Sullivan. In my high school, I was the leader of the people that didn't want to do any more Gilbert and Sullivan. And I was a champion of a Sally Benson play called Junior Miss. So we eliminated Gilbert and Sullivan in favor of Junior Miss and other sparkling hits. And I had read some Gilbert scripts, and I thought they were always very funny. But I couldn't find them funny when I saw them. And time came to do it, and I realized that what I objected to was the tradition, the way in which it was done, and not the work itself. On the contrary, the more I did the work, the more I came to love it. And so all I did, or all I thought I did, or all I meant to do, was to do what was on the page. And as a matter of fact, when we did it in London, the D'Oyly Carte Theatre was one of our producers. They found it absolutely faithful. And they were the first to say that, in fact, it was more faithful to the original, to the script and to the original, than what they were doing after this years of passing it on and altering it by tradition, that this is the way you're supposed to do it. So I don't know. I've never set out to do anything that wasn't really what's on the page. It may come out strangely, but I meant to do it that way.
It was wonderful.
Arvin.
Arvin, yes.
Wilford is a great example of when a fresh approach can enhance traditional material. But one of the things that bothers me often in the theater, in terms of a reapproach of classic work of any kind or traditional work in the theater, is that sometimes it doesn't give the audience enough credit for, I think, understanding one of the joys of the theater, which is the reproduction of other times and other places, and finding instant parallels, not by having to impose a kind of contemporary viewpoint on that material, but discovering that within the material of, say, 100 years ago, there is a perception that is totally related to everything we're going through today. And that sometimes it's only, in my experience, it's only by the kind of faithful reproduction of that world that the parallels really emerge. And that somehow or another, when that world is shattered or altered or distorted, the parallel is lost, and the work seems oddly less direct and less relevant, a word I hate, but I'm sure we'll hear again somehow, than it would be otherwise.
Interesting.
I'd love to hear Mr. Horovitz on this subject.
I've always been from the school of playwrights that who tell directors to sit in the back row. Arvin survived.
And I'm here to tell the tale.
In fact, I haven't destroyed many directors. Directors seem to me to be our real partners in this, although I confess to loving actors as well. As testament, I founded a theater 7 years ago in my home. I live in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And my partner in the theater is a stage director. And with my new plays, and I try to encourage my colleagues who bring new plays to the theater to do the same, usually the director and I go off somewhere together and play all the parts in the play. And really partner in the thing and try to discover an emotional life that we can agree upon. And once we have, then I run back to the text and say, well, if this is the accurate emotional life, then this is what they would say. And the director runs to his notes and says, if this is the accurate emotional life, this is how they would behave. And the last 10 years of my life, I've been getting along quite well with directors.
That's great. John wanted to say something.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly am of the belief that playwriting is as much a collaborative effort as any other part of the theater is acting and directing. And I certainly feel that when I pull my sheets of paper out of the typewriter, if I'm lucky, I'm half done with my work, and the other half of the work, or maybe even 3/4 of the work, happens when I first start working with the director and with actors on the piece, because it's such an interactive, it's a collaboration.
There's one little aside that a lot of people may not know, is that John also is a consummate actor, a very, very fine actor. So that that sort of comes naturally to John, too, I must say.
I, however, had a question to pose. I mean, I think all of us are going to deplore directors who take their concept and impose it on a new work, and the work is totally lost in the process, and the resulting production is a horrific slaughter. But what happens if, just for sake of argument, if a director imposes a concept on a new play, and in spite of the protests of the writer, this concept actually works and takes hold and makes a theatrical statement that even may be something different from what the writer intended? Is this justified or valid?
Maybe you have the difference there between the idea of the cult director, the idea of it, which I think a lot of directors who aren't as talented or as skilled as Peter Brook took that mantle and then I think abused it. And, you know, Peter Brook's an awfully talented guy, and I think whenever a great director like that comes onto the scene, there's a lot of talk about the cult director again. I think it's part of the director's job to, you know, it's a collaborative thing, and like we've been saying, but I think it's part of the director's work to discover the theatrical world that the play can breathe and grow and work in. Sometimes that might be different than the stage directions the playwright put in the script.
I know I, as an actor, have occasionally, well, I don't act anymore, but when I used to, I occasionally would get in a situation where where the director and the playwright were at odds, and I really felt the director knew what he was talking about, and the playwright didn't. And, so what do you do in a situation like that?
I think I don't know, it's not my place to make an editorial.
That was a very difficult statement for you to get out. I recognize that. But
you get to go to all the director parties.
But the director that is bringing out something that you didn't intend, the playwright didn't intend, isn't the intent of your play, though, is to have that presented in a way that is more understandable or with another aspect to it, so that if the director is right in saying,
oh, sure,
I'm going to do it this way, then I don't think there's any question, is there?
From the point of the playwright, you know, the directors should burn in hell for attempting something like that. And if it works, all the more.
Well said. Susan, and then Leslie. And I want...
It's also, I think, and John, I actually think will be the first to agree, frequently I get scripts where the playwright really doesn't know what perhaps the play is about. They can tell you very frequently, almost always, on how the mechanics of it work, you know, what the spine is, what themes are, and things like that. But frequently I find on early drafts that they really don't know what you could call the moral or the message of the play is. And I think that that's something that will give rise to an interpretation. I don't think you guys, if I had to sit down and write a play, I would start out with, okay, Susan, what do you want to tell the world? And what is your philosophy? Well, that would be a wretched play. It would just be awful. It's a backwards way to do it. But as a director, that's what I have to unearth as I'm doing my work, and can bring that back to you. I mean, we have one that we've been working on, a film script that John's been working on. I've been giving him trouble on. We call it working. Where I know for sure what that play is about, bottom line. He can tell me how all the mechanics of it work, but ultimately, I'm sure I'm right. He's not yet, but he will be. And I think that there's a value in there in exploring what that transaction is about, which may give rise to either an interpretation that you as a playwright didn't have in your head when you started it, that may work. And I think that's what it comes from, when it does work. When it doesn't, you're out of luck.
Leslie, okay. Well, Leslie, and then Marvin.
I think I'm going to tell an ex-wife story. This is not one of those, you know, it's but when I was married, my wife would, I would say, what do you think of this? You know, I'd have her read something. I would say, what do you think of it? And she would go on for about 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 35, you know, if not more. And I would say, wait a minute, that's the story you want to write, but that's not the story I want to write. And I think that has to be fairly clear as to, in a relationship with the director, as to what the author wants. And I don't have to be right. I mean, really, I don't necessarily try to be right. I don't try to answer questions. I'm just asking questions as a writer. So consequently, if it runs contrary to the director's opinion, if I think I know the play and I feel very strongly about it, I think it's the director's job to enhance that. Even though, if he doesn't want to, if he disagrees, then he probably should do another play.
Oh, that's when you start asking those questions.
Right.
Exactly. That's what I feel.
Howard, yeah.
A lot depends on the director. There's no such thing as a director in a generic sense. There are directors. I have seen plays on Broadway that were destroyed by the lack of sensibility on the part of the director. I did a play in Dallas, Texas, where, being very much younger, I flew into a rage and threw the director out. So I don't want you to dare enter this theater again. That is one part of it. Now, another part of it is this, that I have a play now running at Stage West in Springfield, Massachusetts, and every day I'm asked to give someone a script. Producer or this one or that one wants a script. And I won't give them a script, because between the script and what is playing there on the stage is a world of difference. One is dead and the other is alive. Now, I'm sitting next to a young man, and I hate to keep saying how brilliant he is, because in 10 years he'll be impossible. And writers in the theater will suffer because of this. But I did a play about Tom Paine, which was sort of loosely based on a book that I wrote 45 years ago. And this play begins in England, and it goes to America, and it goes through the American Revolution, and then it goes back to England, and then it goes to France, and it goes through the French Revolution, and it ends up back in America. Now, from this description, you would say this is impossible. And it was fairly impossible, but Jim here did a thing that was just incredible to me. He turned it into a flowing, fluid object that never said here was the place, but it moved like a thing alive. And I was as astounded as anyone who came into that theater and saw the play. Well, he could not have done this if I had not given him the play. But on the other hand, he saw things which had to be changed that there was no way in the world for me to see. So in that sense, it becomes an absolutely collaborative effort. And when people say to me in protest, well, 100 years ago there were no directors, I don't know, am I right?
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I can only say that the theater suffered. Now, nobody is going to judge Shakespeare by the worst production of Hamlet. Nobody is going to judge Eugene O'Neill by a deplorable production of Anna Christie. But when anyone here on this stage writes a play which could be a brilliant play, and it's slaughtered by a director who is insensitive and witless, as many of them are, more on the coast, I think, than here, then the play is put to death. You can't put Shakespeare to death, and you can't put the plays of Shaw to death, but a new play can be put to death very easily. I saw this years ago. I saw a fascinating play called The Smoke-Filled Room. It's probably so many years ago that nobody on the platform remembers it. Perhaps you do. It was directed by George Roy Hill. He slaughtered the play. He destroyed it so thoroughly that it vanished 2 nights later, never picked up again. So it's a complex subject, but I am old hand at writing. I've been at this for better than half a century, and I've been writing plays to satisfy myself and various regional theaters for the past 50 years. And heaven help me if I ever have to do one without a director. I simply cannot see how it can be done.
Very good.
If I can make just a comment on it, it's the same thing when I was I'm not a real experienced director now. I'll be when I'm dead, I suppose. But when I was first working with a very gifted actor, I had worked and I'd prepared the play, and I thought, well, this is what he should do. This is exactly what he should do. All right? And he came in there, and he heard what I had to say, and he said, yeah, right, okay. And I said, yeah, but you're not doing what I want you to do. You know, you're doing a little differently. I think that he should be more, right? He was actually really good, and it was a week into the show after it opened, and I had trouble with him the whole time, but a week after I realized he was right, and I was less experienced. I think one of the problems with playwriting, where you get that feeling of burn in hell, is you're not produced enough, so that each chance is very precious, so that you don't have the leisure to say, to have your work bandied about or screwed around or, fooled with. I think, the bottom line is the play, and I think it is the playwright. I don't think if the director has something else to fool around with, he should do another play, and you should say, get out, leave, I think...
A side issue of this, though, which is that when you have the opportunity as a playwright to be produced fairly often, is that a good piece of material can exist in obviously different interpretations, which each of which can enhance the basic material. I just had an experience of opening a production of All My Sons by Arthur Miller. And in conversations with Arthur about the play, one of the things that he noticed was that in this particular production that I've just done, that the women emerged very strongly, and that there was a tremendous central conflict between the mother and the prospective daughter-in-law coming into the family. In the original production, which Kazan did, brilliantly, I'm sure, because he's one of the greatest directors that we've ever had, nevertheless, his focus and interest was entirely related to the men in the play, so that the play emerged as a tremendous father-son conflict. That kind of difference is amazing with the same piece of material, and it's wonderful when a playwright is able to see different productions of the same work which can have equal and different validities. And by extension, I get very impatient with the critical attitude in this country, which often has to go into a situation of equating one with the other at all times. So, so that there's not the idea that the theater is a continuum, and that everyone should have a shot at an interpretation.
As a director,
if I could add to that.
Yeah.
Obviously, what Arvin is dealing with is a play that had great political impact when it was first written, and was written for political impact, and has a different kind of political impact now in our time. And as I chase around the world and look at my plays being done here and there, I have to pull back. Well, I think any playwright, after a time, learns to, in the first meeting with a director, to ask the question, why do you want to direct the play? What's the play about? And I discovered that a play of mine, like The Widow's Blind Date, a play that's going to be done in New York this year, has to have a different approach when it's done in Massachusetts, where the play is set, and certainly had to have a different approach when it was done in France last season in French. It was, to a French sensibility, exactly the same play, but to my North Shore, Massachusetts sensibility, it certainly wasn't. But it's very important that a playwright realize that the audience helps create the play, that we are not dealing in film or television, we're dealing in theater, and there are living people out there. And what they interpret is a great part of the creation, and it's essential to a playwright that he allow a director to be a bridge between what he's brought to town and what the town needs and deserves and will have.
Wouldn't it be a good idea today to do what we used to do in the old days, which was to get the director and the playwright together and have them go off and work on the script so that they both knew what they were going to do before they went into rehearsal? It seems to me that that was a very sensible idea, and we never used to change a play very much. once it went into rehearsal, and it went very smoothly, and usually the opening was marvelous. And that was without going out of town or anything else. And it seems to me as though it should be done today, and when I produce a new play, I still do it that way.
I agree with you. I think reaching a common understanding of the intention of the author and also your intention with what you're going to do with a piece, you have no right to start rehearsal, really, until you do that.
And even line changes and things as you go along,
But
You
Gene,
get
one
an
of the
awful lot done.
one of the saddest aspects of that is that the economics at the moment so preclude that, because for the freelance director, as well as the freelance designer, he or she, in order to survive, usually has shows virtually overlapping to be able to make enough money. It's so sad that's
you
why
you pay the director. You pay the director part of what he earns when he's doing that. That's part of the job.
we must talk about this, Gene.
I'd like to go back to All My Sons. How did you arrive at this different direction, this different slant that the play was going to take how many years later? As a director, were you able to look at this and say, I want to take it with the emphasis on the women, or did it just naturally emerge that way?
For me, I can only speak really for myself, for me it always comes from feelings. I mean, it's what I feel about a play, and I don't usually abstract it until later when I look at a finished production and realize that's what I've done. But I know years ago in New York when I did Long Day's Journey into Night, I think one of the most specific aspects of that production was Geraldine Fitzgerald's performance as Mary Tyrone, and it had everything to do with what I'd come to feel about the mother in that play without even knowing really that that's what I felt. Just a sense, an emotional sense that the family unit was much more complex than it had been given credit for being, and that the mother was not a sort of wraith-like, semi-glamorous figure who shuffled around the perimeters of the action, but was in fact an active neurotic along with everyone else in the household, and that there was a very complex relationship. So I think it comes from feelings in my case.
If I may, it relates to the director's craft, and I see, Susan. How do you make that manifest as a director? How do you bring that about? We can say, well, it comes out that the emphasis, well, we're going to focus on the women, or with Geraldine's interpretation of Mary Tyrone. How do you, as a craftsman, take that, articulate that statement, but how do you make that manifest on the stage?
Well, first of all, I'm sure everyone would have a comment on that.
To start from the beginning, for us, I think it's important. From your first reading on for it.
Well, it's before the reading. I think I was just about to say, for me, it's in a situation like that, it's largely casting. The first meeting I had with Geraldine Fitzgerald, I knew intuitively that this was my Mary Tyrone from my interpretation of the play because of a basic earthy strength and directness and refusal to shy away from complexities that's embodied in that particular performer. So that I think by casting Geraldine Fitzgerald in that part, I had already made a statement before I ever got near a reading. That's where it really begins for me.
Mm-hmm. But one quick story. I was at the opening of a Pinter play that Zeffirelli did in Rome with Pinter in the audience. And the curtain went up, or lights came on. I can't remember if there was a curtain, in fact. And it became apparent that he had done a play that Pinter had written for 2 women and a man with 3 women. And about 2 minutes of play played, and I thought, oh, this will be interesting to see how Harold deals with this. And he's very much a gentleman, very much an Englishman. And he stood up in the middle of the audience on opening night and said, "Stop this! Stop this!"
Courage. Oh, for that courage.
Did they stop it? Absolutely. The curtain came down.
Good for him.
Susan,
Yeah, I think, at least for me, it comes from, and I'm interested to hear that I'm not the only one that does it like that, but it comes from everybody on a production team, starting with the playwright, when we, usually sit down at my kitchen table, if I had a kitchen, and talk about what this play is about. Then if you move on, it should be producers included in this, but usually it isn't. the next person that comes through my life is generally a scene designer. And I'm certainly not against ripping those people off. They have wonderful minds, good ones. And I'll spend a couple of weeks, if I have the luxury, and you're absolutely right that you usually have to do 2 or 3 shows at the same time in order to make a living in this business. But to talk with the designer if you get a good one. And as you develop a concept, the play starts to emerge out of that. And then I do exactly the same thing, which is go right to actors. I call it the click in auditions. When you sit there, you can sit there for days, and they'll come in and read these monologues or read these scenes, and you think this is never going to happen, you know, it can't be cast, and I have no more words to tell what I need here. But then that person comes through and it goes click, and it's the Geraldine Fitzgerald story. You're on. And pretty soon the chemistry starts doing that. And they begin, at least for me, to tell me how the play should be, built by who's in it, and who's designing it, and who's sitting across the table.
And on one of our seminars, we had a young actor, also out of Yale, who said that he auditioned directors, that it was important for him as an actor to know how a director was going to work. And it wasn't enough for the director to say, oh, that's fine, I know you're perfect for the part. And he said, no, but I don't know that you're perfect for the play in directing. I want to know what you think the play should be and how it should be. Because that's a privilege that you can have when you're strong and working a lot and successful, that you can do that.
Well, and it's not wrong. I mean, we get in these things that take us 4 to 6 weeks to rehearse, and I mean, all of a sudden you're married to 20 people. Would you jump into that on just on the basis of 1 audition, or 2, maybe 3, a callback? It's terrible.
Of course, a certain kind of honesty can backfire. I did a play out of town some years ago, a new play actually of Arthur Miller's, and an actor who definitely shall remain nameless, whom I hadn't particularly wanted to even
remain unknown.
both. I hadn't really particularly wanted to see this actor because I felt he was wrong, but Arthur had heard a lot about him, and we brought him in. He had read the script, and to my absolute amazement, he sat down and immediately said, here are the conditions, Mr. Miller, under which I would consider playing this part. And he began to outline to Arthur Miller everything that he thought was wrong with the character. And to my absolute astonishment, Arthur sat and nodded and kept saying, that's very interesting, he said. Oh, and you felt that? Oh, well, isn't that so? And I thought, I'm in one of those miraculous theater stories that I'll have to tell about for years, where this guy came in and dared say to Arthur Miller, everything that was wrong with the character, and he's going to get the part, you know. And I was thinking, what am I going to say to Arthur about? Anyway, finally he stood up and shook hands all around, and Arthur shook him warmly by the hand and said, it was really fascinating talking to you, wonderful to meet you. And he walked out, and Arthur turned to me and said, who is that son of a bitch? So I thought,
wonderful. This brings up sort of the need for a referee or traffic cop, and I think I ought to refer to my co-moderator here, who has been a producer and a director, about your attitude, although I realize this is not a seminar in producing, but we are talking about playwrights and directors. Have you had, how do you deal with that? If you deal with conflict, if there is conflict, you say about the director going off and all.
No, I never had it because I always had the director and the playwright get together. And if there was anything between them that wasn't right, you know, they didn't like each other, or one had one idea, one had another, I had to change immediately, and I did several times. I even had it when I was doing revivals. You know, I one time did Porgy and Bess, and I took a music director because the Gershwins wanted him. And I went up to, it was about the 3rd rehearsal, and I saw that he was looking at the score and conducting like this, and the chorus was paying no attention to him at all and kind of giggling. And my general manager said, I think he's terrible. And I said, I don't think he knows this. So I called up Lee Gershwin, and I said, tell me about the background of this man. And she said, well, we heard him do a marvelous Porgy and Bess suite with the Los Angeles Philharmonic. And I said, that is not putting on an opera, and I've got to let him go, and you have to back me up. And it was very difficult, but we let him go, or we would have had a fiasco.
John?
I mean, we've talked so far about directors and playwrights in a production situation. what kind of relationship should they have, or do they have, or might they have in a pre-production development situation, such as you find at the O'Neill Playwrights Conference?
Well, I think that's interesting, and maybe I can put another point that I wanted to bring out, actually, because when we worked together, we did the play at Williamstown, and like Howard said, it had all these different countries and had 48 characters and all 18th century costumes. And you talk to Nikos and you say, well, Nikos, have I got a budget of what? And he goes, you know, maybe give you $200, you know? And you go, well, wait a minute, this is powdered wigs and all this other stuff. And he goes, well, you know, Jim, you can work it out, go. So then you leave the room kind of going, oh, no. And then you get your designer. And
here's the powder.
No, really. But I'll tell you, where we did that particular play and where I've worked on other plays has shaped the play. We did that in a 90-seat theater, and we did it bare bones because a lot of it, we had to use those means to make it work, and luckily the play responded to that, I think. And there are other places like, I haven't worked at the O'Neill, but the Winterfest, I think, really shapes a play. The theater, where it's done, will really inform the play, and it might work out great, and it might be just awful.
But even these are full production situations, even though they're bare bone production situations. What about the part
Before
of the
you get to
theater
that.
that before it
Right.
even gets to a full production, where you a staged reading or a sit-down reading or a...
That's the scariest time for a director, I think, because because you don't have a chance to put your money where your mouth is. And I was working on, and Will was teaching at Yale, and I had commissioned 3 writers to work on plays about Lester Young. And now around midnight the movies come out, but it took a Frenchman to do it. But and one of the plays, and this playwright's very good and everyone knows him, but he'd written this play, and this is in pre-production. We're banding this one about, and it wasn't very good because he hadn't spent very much time on it. He just kind of did it. And John Guare was in the classroom, and this is pre-production, and we read the play, and John kind of went, well, all right. And I said, don't worry, it can be great. I can do this with it, I can do that with it, you know, and I can do this, and I can do that. And he said, you are the biggest enemy to playwrights at this point because you're not asking him to do his best. You're just putting on a rap and saying how you're going to serve this up and make it a nice souffle out of nothing. And the problem with pre-production often is the director is really just a listener, or also just a challenge, I guess, a little bit and say, is this really your intention? Well, this is what I think about it. But it's a hard time for the director. I usually just, it's hard to be active because you really can't say, well, I think it's this, look and see, you know?
There is a role that I think that has begun to develop in the middle here. That might be even the subject for another seminar sometime, Isabel, which is the dramaturg,
Right.
that awful word that nobody kind of knows what it is, that Edith Oliver of the New Yorker said, you know, what it is it's like those old washing machines that had a crank on the side with a crank on the side. But that's what happens in those kinds of situations where there is now a growing thing where there's another pair of eyes and ears that contributes to the helping the director in that early situation, John, that you talked about.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a growing thing. Yeah, Les, you.
Well, I was going to say, I think that, to respond to Jim, I think the pre-production for me is very important. One of the things, I just got an idea a moment or two ago about, one of the things that directors have helped me, one, I want to say Douglas Turner Ward at the Negro Ensemble Company, has helped me to not cover up a lie. You know, sometimes, there's a tendency, or at least I have a tendency as a writer, or I had a tendency as a writer, not to tell the truth, but to want to be liked by the audience. And I had that tendency. I don't know whether there are other writers here. And there are times when you can't worry about that. And the writing reflects that, backing away from an issue or covering a lie. And there have been other plays written, that are very famous plays written, where the lie is still being covered, I think. And I think that my relationship with the director or directors has been to bring me out till I tell the truth, whether it's painful or not, or whether I will need a bodyguard after the show or not. And that helps, and I think that's one of the pre-production things that I need. I need someone to tell me, you're not doing it, you're not telling the truth, you must go for it, and go for the gold, and suffer the consequences.
Have you had any experiences?
Well, yes,
You'd like to
I
talk
do
about?
a lot of both old plays and new ones. But with new plays, normally you have a long period of readings, and then we give a reading and then work on it some more, and give a reading and work on it some more. but once I'm in rehearsal, I have to get it on.
Yeah.
And at that point, I have to make things work that maybe we didn't solve, or have, you do what you do. But for me, the most important period is the reading period as far as developing the material. And I find it extremely useful because I don't... I like Arvin thing when he says it was an emotional response. Mine is entirely emotional, and I don't like to intellectualize, I guess because I come from too much schooling. And, so for me, the reading is, we try to get people who don't necessarily have anything to do with the theater, and we give it a reading, and there's nothing to hide it. I don't believe in staging readings or any of those things. And it's either interesting or it's not interesting. I find I either care or I don't care. And I find the people who hear it are either engaged or they're not engaged. And there's none of those little tricks that you learn all your life do you use in a reading. As a matter of fact, you very carefully avoid all the things you know how to do and let the work appear. And I find all playwrights that I've dealt with respond to that. I mean, there's nothing like having to sit there and just have nothing to hide behind, and to say, well, yeah, I've never had any of these collaboration problems, essentially because I find that if the writer says, well, this is what it is and this is what it will be, I can just nod and say, oh, yes, well, let's try that, and we give a little reading, and if it works, or normally, they're the first to want to alter it if it isn't what they imagined it was going to work in the way they imagined. So I always believe in going with whatever the playwright thinks it is, and then I don't believe in arguing about it. In other words, if they have, I just nod, and then they begin to worry that I'm thinking something that I may or may not be thinking. The psychology of all creative artists is that they're not really that dogmatic or certain or any of those things. On the contrary, I find the opposite problem, that I have to convince them that maybe they were right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that they're altogether too willing to give up something rather than try to make it work. So I've never had those problems that people speak of.
Yeah.
Do you subconsciously make the decision between a dead playwright and a living playwright for the play that you want to do? Do you have any preference?
No, I just have to like it.
Ones are quieter.
No, not at all. I have to just like it, or like the people. It's sort of like my dog sense is better than my brain sense, in the sense that if I analyze something, I'm usually wrong. If I just sort of go with it and say, well, that's what I really feel, as opposed to what I think I should feel, I'm usually right. So if the script is something that I just like, then it's pretty good. If I think I ought to, it never works.
Wilford just touched on something that I think is so important that we maybe could follow up on just for a second. Is I find that part of the pre-production relationship, director and writer, or even during production relationship, that scares me sometimes is, in my experience in life, I found the writer almost too willing to encompass the director's suggestions, and I've been trying over these last years to learn the process of being able to make it so suggestive but indirect that it then has to get filtered through the writer's process, because it's not my organic process, it's his. And no matter how much I can intellectualize, as you were saying, Susan, about going to the philosophy and the direction, I mean, the gut impulse is his. And if you can't somehow continue to tap that gut impulse, you run into a lot of trouble, and I find that very hard.
But see, I find from a writer's point of view that when a director comes into a project, he or she is often the first objective eye that I have in this script. And so suddenly, so that I feel, although as a writer, I have attempted to put my soul on paper in some way, as soon as I get this objective eye in here, I myself try to be as objective as possible, which I have to be, and feel that I'm a baby at this. so that anything that the subjective eye says, I will gobble up.
That's true.
You know what the...
And it's hard to know where the balance is.
Yeah, it is. I agree.
Well, you deal with a lot of personalities. It's funny, I agree with everybody on the panel.
What about
I was just thinking, I probably worked with 9 different directors last year, 9 different directors, and Steve Zuckerman and I did 3 plays together. So I go around to a lot of plays get done. And there are danger signals. When a director knows too much, it's very dangerous. And probably the worst of all is when a director is like a terrible parent, sort of withholds his love or her love and says nothing and sits in the back of the theater. You think, the first impulse is that person is a genius. And then you overcome that and realize you're actually not getting any help. And well, I guess what I want to say is that there are all theater people talking, not movie people or television people. And when you make a commitment, when you put your life down in the theater, as we have, you define yourself as a collaborative artist. And to say that Peter Brook is a kind of creator or author himself is he's nothing compared to the most mediocre Hollywood movie director. I mean, he is desperate to interpret your work accurately and has a feverish commitment to not let it be boring, which is good too. There is, when Wilford says, I've never had any of these horrible things happen, of course, the director is always there. It's the tree in the forest, and you are there. A playwright very often arrives on the scene, and it's too late. Arvin said something I thought was sage. If a director has cast my play and says, come to rehearsal, I'd almost just as soon not, because it's too late. I think that once the play is cast, 80% of the interpretation is done.
Right.
So a very clever playwright, if he only has a couple of days to be around the director, gets out for the casting and sends warm, supportive notes from...
Also, a lot of good talk about the play happens when you're looking at different people. You're saying, well, this person would bring this to the role. Well, what is the role?
We're just about to take a break. But before we do, I'd like to have you think about this and how your answer will be. How much influence is the playwright going to have on casting? He's sitting there with the director, and the playwright is there, and you're looking at people. You knew Geraldine's work, and you looked at her, and you knew that that was for you. The playwright, young or not young, does not know the work of the performer that is there and is being suggested. And he says, I don't think that's right, I don't think that's the type or whatever. How much influence does he have? How much strength does a playwright have at that point, which is very important. As you said, before the director gets at it, you want to know who and see what the casting is going to be.
It must depend on other people. To me, I have written endless novels, and a novel is not a play, and frequently can't become a play, no matter what you do with it. But in a play, you are writing sound. You do not write sound in a novel. And for example, suppose you say she screams. There are 100 different kinds of screams. Until I hear that scream on the stage, I am not sure what is happening there. I cannot see how you can create a play on paper. And while we should make no comparisons with Mr. Shakespeare, I am sure that half of what he wrote was created by him out of the staging.
Can you save the rest of this for when we come back? I've just been told we are now going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue with this discussion, and there'll be questions from the audience, and I know there will be an enormous amount, so we'll need as much time as possible. Don't go away. We are continuing the American Theatre Wing seminars on working in the theater, which are coming to you from the City University Graduate Center of New York, 42nd Street. This seminar, which is part of the programs that the Wing brings to the community all year round, is an extraordinary one. It is on the playwright and the director, and the talent and the knowledge and the skills of the people involved are so wonderfully given and exchanged on this program that I don't want to take up any more time. Our co-moderators will introduce them again, but I have to apologize to Howard Fast, who I interrupted so abruptly as we went off the air. And with apologizing, I'm going to ask him to continue his statement and also to tell us a little bit more about Citizen Tom Paine, which is being developed now for Broadway. And with all that Mr. Fast has written, this is the first time he's doing a play on Broadway. So at some point, will you get back to that, Mr. Fast? Thank you very much for being here. Jean Dalrymple and George White, would you please continue?
Yes.
Well, I'll go on for just a bit. In the three forms of art that dominate today, the novel is a narration in words. It's a narration. The film is a narration in pictures, at its best. Now, both of them use the dialectic of dialogue. The theater is not a narration. The theater is a conflict in words. So you don't have the pictures and you don't have the pages of narrative description. All you have are the words. People who speak these words battle each other, and they battle with words. In some plays where they get physical, it rarely works. The ideal theater is words. Now, I'm simply saying that it is impossible for me, and I would imagine for most writers, to know how these words will sound and what their sound will make, what it will move. The theater is sound. The written page that we present to the actors and the director, this is written word. The two are different, and very often we forget how different the two are. And that is why, for me, when I give it to the director, he has sounds and I have sounds. And sometimes the sounds I imagine are better, sometimes the sounds he imagines are better, or sometimes the words are impossible. There's no way for me to know.
Very interesting. Sir, also, to pick up what Isabel was saying also earlier, you said that Tom Paine came out of a book you had written 45 years ago. What made you want to take it from, let's say, have you been obsessed with Tom Paine for you, or what?
Or obsessed with Broadway.
Yeah, there we are. Okay, well said. Sure.
Well, you know what I'm obsessed with. During World War II, in that little theater in London that's mostly underground, they were playing Henry, and the interlocutor, whatever he is called, got up and he said, "Here are the armies of France, and here's our thin English line of bowmen." And they were bombing London at the same time. And I was told by my British publisher who was there, he said this was an audience swimming with tears as they watched this. And seeing the play subsequently, I saw the French army, the ranks of knights, and that thin line of English bowmen. And this is what we can do in the theater better than they could ever do it on the screen, better than it can ever be done in a book. See? But it is done with the wonderful sound of words in what is our gift, the most wonderful language ever evolved on the face of this earth. We have this gift, and it is this gift that produced Shakespeare as much as Shakespeare producing the language which now people were saying. So in Tom Paine, I had a book which dealt with two revolutions, with a very important imprisonment, with the preparation for the revolution in America, with the ideology of this man who was to the left of everyone in the revolution, but who, as much as anyone, created the revolution. How do you do it? And I did it. I borrowed that simple thing from Shakespeare. If you have the words, you can convince an audience, you can have them suspend their disbelief, and they will see an army marching on the stage where there is no army. But at the same time, we had to flow through this long passage of a man's life. Now, the film today will not buy a book which concerns the total life of a man or a woman. They say, well, we can no longer do that film, it's for television. But in the theater, strangely enough, you can still do it. And you can do it well. So this is what I presented to Jim here. But presenting it to Jim, I really had no idea how it could be done. I mean, I knew it could be done. Here were the words, here were the scenes. Now, go convince an audience that they are seeing Philadelphia, that they are seeing the Battle of Trenton, that they are seeing every other thing that happened in this man's life.
Let me tell you, having him show
Between
up...
us, we did it.
Yeah. I started working on it, and then Howard showed up, I think, a week after we were in rehearsal, and I'll tell you, you've just heard him talk, I've never been more scared in my life, you know? Because I do think part of the directing is I think when you get an approval or a sign of acknowledgement from the playwright, man, you're home. I mean, the next step is getting it, I think, well, from your actors and the audience finally and the whole thing. But I really felt like I had taken Dad's car. I said, tell you what, you know, we don't need all these blackouts, maybe. We really don't need them, I don't think. And as far as this, maybe instead of this, we'll just do without this, maybe, and hope. And then he comes in, you know, and I added a couple of characters and this and that, you know, and got rid of a little bit of what I thought was the PBS part of it, which is the problem of the 18th century and portraying that, which is, we think it's all a very stuffy period, but I'll tell you, the 18th century and subsequent reading about it is one of the most vigorous periods around, and puts ours to shame. And so then, when he came into rehearsal, you know, and I don't think I've ever been so nervous in my life, much more than opening night. And like most playwrights, he didn't go, oh, great, or this or that. He just said, okay, what about this now?
It is your thoughts that
well, we rewrote,
kings.
We rewrote constantly, and unlike Arvin's experience, the actors made some astonishing contributions. Because an actor, without deprecating, an actor becomes the character. That's why actors have so many problems when they're not in character. They become, in a way that no one else can become. They become the character. And suddenly they're thinking as the character. And am I doing this or am I doing that? And they do say things, not too often, but they do say things that are marvelously valuable.
There is a famous story about the actor and the director, which again this is not, but it does put the director a little bit, you know, in a place. Tony Richardson once said that his first time round doing Importance of Being Earnest with Dame Edith Evans, he walked into the rehearsal to find the actors all there, and Edith Evans on her feet, walking all over the stage, reading the script and saying, now I move over there, now you move over here, I'll sit down over here, going through the entire play. He watched in astonishment for about 10 minutes and then said, excuse me, Dame Edith. She said, yes, young man. And he said, I want to introduce myself. I'm Tony Richardson, your director. She said, oh, how sweet. Will you go sit over there? We'll be with you.
I'd like to... Mr. Horovitz mentioned before that we were all theater people here. Everyone is writing and directing and involved and interested in the theater. Could somebody pick that up and say, despite everybody's complaint about, oh my, the theater, and you can't exist economically, or you have to go off other places for it, you have to teach, as they discussed in the Playwrights Conference. a couple of weeks ago. Why are you all still with the theater?
Oh, that's...
Do you want to start?
I'll start with that. For me, it's easy. The theater is active, and we live in a passive culture, I think, and there are very few active places left. It's active for the audience. It's active, obviously, for all of us who are doing the work. But I mean, you know, how the audience feels on any given night will have a drastic effect on the event at hand. How the performers feel, obviously, will have a drastic effect. So that there's a kind of responsibility and an involvement, and it isn't a kind of, or shouldn't be, a kind of sitting back. And so much of, I think, contemporary life is sitting back. So it seems to me.
I was a scientist for about 10 years. I did cancer research, and research in endocrinology. But my desire to write began to supersede my need to look through a microscope, and I'd get to work later and later each morning. I would pretend I was on time, of course, so I'm in a theater because I made a change. You know, I realized, I think Albert Camus talked about the multiple consciousness theory, that we can do more than one thing in a lifetime, and I took him up on it and decided to change the profession, although I think I still use the disciplines. But I found the theater the best way for me to express myself as a human being, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't been rife with difficulties and problems. I mean, I write teleplays as well to you know, make a living. Although I prefer the theater. I think the theater is, if I had the choice between writing a play and writing a film script, I would take a play anytime.
Why? Despite the money.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I think an answer to that, the why, I don't know if I'll jump in. I'll just say, it's what Howard said. I think what you can do in the theater is fairly, it's up to your imagination, the performer's imagination, the audience's imagination. I mean, and that can be unlimited, actually. And if you look at what different types of theater the world offers us, I mean, our palette is unlimited.
Yes. Right.
And I think it's also what Arvin says, it's a basic human thing where humans come together and see other humans. I mean, it's as basic as that.
Yeah.
And it's also great fun when you're doing it. I mean, actually.
I think it's also the logic problems involved in how a play works and how you get a play from the page to the stage and to the audience are just endlessly interesting. You know, how does this thing... Playwriting is the hardest kind of writing there is. At least that's what playwrights tell me, and I expect they're right. Other writers tell me that too. That just the logic problem involved in adhering to the unities and not perhaps having, if the idea you have in your mind takes 500 people to execute as characters, how do you shrink that down to 5 people? Because it likely won't get produced if that doesn't happen. And one set, or maybe 2 if you're lucky. I mean, how you fit all that together, just the geometry of it, for my money, is just, it's unbelievably interesting. And it always changes. Every play is different. You know, what is this guy saying? And how do you get it to work on stage? And how do you get it for this transaction to happen between the audience and the actor? It's just infinite.
It's a fascinating life, no matter what part you're playing in it. Whether you're a scenic designer, a costume designer, a director, a playwright, an actor, it's marvelously fascinating.
What about the economics of it?
Well, before we get off of this, I'm sitting here listening to it, thinking that I wrote a novel when I was 13 and it was rejected. It was praised for having a wonderful childlike quality, but it was rejected. And so I wrote a play and it got put on and I got a lot of approval, so I've stuck with that. And it's lucky that I didn't get a lot of approval for driving a taxi, I suppose. And the theater was a place to get girls. But I think that we really try to justify what we do, and I don't think the theater will replace night baseball or cure cancer, but I think if we're responsible in what we do, we can approach people in a loving way and lead them to a higher quality of life and then pass it along to the next group. That's all I wanted to say.
Very well said.
Isabel, you mentioned economics and the economic problems and the pressures that one feels. John, you have crossed the lines too, obviously with Agnes of God in film and theater. you want to address this a little bit, and why you come back to the theater?
I don't know. It sort of depends. Sometimes I wish I didn't have to come back to the theater, but I do. Talk to me tomorrow, and I wish I was doing something else. I mean, I'm in an odd situation because I am able to make a living with what I do as a writer. Certainly not really in the theater so much, but also for screen and TV. So that sometimes I wonder if I'm in an... I think there's a reversal trap that you can feel. Sometimes I feel that I'm in the theater because I can't do anything else and make any kind of living at it. Sometimes I think that if I could make a decent living carrying mail, I would really, really like to do that instead. I think that most of the time. Really.
We're about to go to questions, and again, I interrupt people all the time. As I prepare for the questions, I'm going to ask George White, as director, to say one or two words, and also why you're going to China tomorrow.
Was it something we said, George?
Yes, yes. It's called Getting Out of Town. No, well, thank you. I am directing an American. I guess it's the first American musical in China, and we'll be directing in April and May production of The Music Man in Beijing. So I'm going out tomorrow to cast it, which gives me a lot of pause because I don't know. It'll be in Chinese with a Chinese company. You haven't lived until you've heard Shibubi in Chinese.
Will you bring back 24 trombones?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Would you come up for the first question, please?
Thank you. My name is Millage Mosley, and since we live in a multicultural society where the United States is made up of so many different kinds of people, kinds of ways they think and ideas, I'm addressing this to Israel Horovitz. But what are your ideas about non-traditional casting? And if you do believe in non-traditional casting, could you give us some examples of that, please?
Well, it's kind of a sore point, yeah. In recent years, this all harkens, but Lloyd Richards once asked me if I would cast a play with all black actors. I remember that.
Well, I don't mean only racial. I mean gender, male, female, as well as handicap. You know, let's include everything.
It's a very tricky business for a writer to respond to his or her own work the first time around and move away from the dream. Gully Jimson, as the wall fell down, said, "This wasn't the vision I had," and you have this sort of image stuck in your head, and you try to reproduce that as best you can. In recent years, I've tried to write plays that more explore the problem than to try to explore the problem through unusual casting in my own plays. I don't know if that's an answer for you.
No,
but
I don't think so.
I've never seen the point exactly of getting into a corner here. Sometimes in life you really don't know what you're talking about.
I think it has to answer your question.
Yeah, can I get comments from the other panel members?
Well, if we have time. Thank you very much.
My name is Lou Rose, and I'm addressing this to any writers who care to answer this question. Marsha Norman wrote in the Times an article of complaint that actors trying to participate in the writing of plays to the extent they want more or less equal monetary reward and equal recognition with the writer. I would like to ask any writer who would care to answer whether he's had this problem and whether he considers it a growing problem in the theater.
As I said, I really believe in that playwriting is a collaborative effort. I was present when Marcia originally delivered that speech to New Dramatist Luncheon, and it was even, I feel, even a more powerful speech than the final article in the Times, which had to be edited down somewhat. I could not agree with her more completely in what she said. I certainly am greatly indebted as a writer to whatever input actors and directors have in the process of creating a play or production. I also feel that as an active writer, I have an equal amount of contribution to make to their directing and to the directing and the acting of a production, and I certainly don't ask to participate monetarily in their rewards. I don't think it's a problem with actors or directors. I think it's the unions that seem to be bringing this forward, or some agents that seem to be bringing this forward, and it's an unfortunate problem. I don't know.
That too is for another seminar. There's so much to be said.
Can I say one quick thing?
Yes.
I believe in the insight, an actor providing insight, that the lines are mine. You know, yeah. I write the lines, and I find I write them better than actors do. At least my play, anyway.
Hi, I'd like to ask Arvin Brown, how important are stage tasks not indicated in the play, and when do they get in the way?
Stage tasks?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. That's a wonderful question. First of all, one of the things that I find, I guess a lot of directors do this, but one of the early things that I do in a rehearsal period is attempt to ignore, for the most part, with the actors, the stage tasks that are already stated within the text, only because I don't necessarily have a way of knowing where that comes from. I will reserve that copy myself of everything that's been suggested in terms of stage behavior, and at some later point in the rehearsal process, if I find it valuable, I will go back to what was originally stated in the script, and very often I will do that. I think stage behavior, stage tasks, however business, whatever term we want to use for all that, obviously has a tremendous importance in the final production as long as it illuminates situation and character. I think the greatest trap of it in the early stages of rehearsal has to do with the fact that it is a protection, you know, against the actor's exploration of character very often. Now, there are some actors who can work within a physical business and get to a psychological or emotional depth, and I respect that. That's a method. But very often, particularly with younger performers, it's a screen. You know, I mean, it's very easy to lose oneself in all of that and not develop, not do the probing that kind of has to happen, and then the business is kind of added. It's not helpful, and particularly if it just comes from a director who has some image that this scene should be about sewing, and it's a wonderful scene about sewing in which nothing human happens. You know, that's to me the danger.
Thank you. I think we have time for just one more question.
This is a question for Wilford Leach. The Dramatists Guild had a seminar recently, and one of the topics discussed was whether to have a play produced in New York or at a regional theater. Would you prefer your play opening in a regional theater, or would you hope or hold out for a New York opening?
Well, these days I'm a director, so of course I'm always praying somebody will give me a script that I'm excited about doing, so I want to do it in New York because that's where I am. Actually, this is more appropriate for the writers here, because nowadays I direct them.
Mr. Pielmeier, what would you say?
I think when you're talking about a New York production, you're also talking about a certain economic future of a play. I think regional theaters are much easier areas sometimes to work with. I think sometimes much more creative things can be done there, and much more exciting things can be done often in regional theaters because there's so much pressure. But
Could I add to that? May I add to that?
Yes.
I'd like to say that for my part, when a play is done in New York, it's the end of work. And the way things are in our lifetimes now, pretty much, you want to have lots of regional theaters or lots of, we're not talking about indigenous theater, but theaters out in New York to get your work done. And when you get to New York with a play, be prepared for, you're moving inexorably toward the marketplace. And when you get to New York, chances are it'll cost a lot of money to produce it, and 300 to 500 people will come in and write about it and send their articles out, and it seems a little beside the point after you survive all of that to then fix the second act. It's a terminal.
One very quick question and a quick answer.
I'd like to address this to Susan Gregg. What is the best advice you can give to a new playwright for his script development?
Get yourself to a dramaturg quick.
Okay. Thank you very much. These seminars are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. They are but one of the programs of the American Theater Wing. Today's seminar was on the playwright and the director. And I cannot tell you how often I find myself saying, not enough time. And we must go on and talk about the theater and listen to the wise words that come out of our panelists. But never has it been more so than today in this extraordinary panel of playwrights and directors, all of whom are giving their time, their knowledge, they're sharing their words with you. The important thing about the theater is that without the word, no matter how much the actor puts in, and no matter how much the director says he's going to do with the actors and the play, it does start with the play, and it does start with the word. And so thank you all for being here, for making that word come alive in that exciting way that only in the theater it could happen. I'm Isabel Stevenson. I'm president of the American Theater Wing, and I want to thank all of you for being here on this seminar, are part of our series of working in the theater, and they will continue with the production and with the design awards. Thank you all for being here.